like to begin from Dalid to Zayin. Perek Yudal Posuk to Zayin. This is right after Avram goes to battle when Lot is taken captive by the four kings, and he defeats the four kings. So the Posuk says, "V'Yoshev is kol harachush." He returned all the possessions that were taken by the captors, by these four kings. He returned it. V'gam mislot ochiv u'rechush v'hishiv. And also he returned Lot, his brother, meaning his nephew, u'rechusho, and his possessions. V'gam misanoshim esom. And he brought back the women and the people, meaning they were the captives. So Avram Avinu fully restored the Canaanite people, the possessions, their possessions, Lot, his possessions, and the women and the people. Now, usually, the person is a victor. If you're the victor, everything belongs to you. So if the people were the captives of someone else, and now you're the victor, their captives become your captives. The possessions that they had taken as spoils of war become the victor's spoils of war. And we understand that Lot, his nephew, and his possessions, Avram was not interested in taking possession of Lot or his possessions. But the others, the king of Sodom, his subjects, and all their possessions, they were rightfully his because he was the victor. That's the way usually it works. Vayetze melech Sodom l'koroso, achrei shuvo me'akos eskadol ome v'samlochim asherito alemek shovei hu emek hamelech. The king of Sodom had gone out towards him after he had returned from smiting Kedoloma. He was the main king of the four, and the other kings who were his allies, his compatriots, El Emek Shavei Hu Emek Hamelech. Okay? I'm going to skip 2 psukim, to Chof Aleph. V'yomem Melech Sodom el Avram. The king of Sodom says to Avram, Tein li hanefesh v'rechush kach. Give me the people, give me back my subjects, and you take the spoils. V'rechush kach, you take the possessions. The Torah had quantified and identified who is Sodom. Royim v'chatom l'Hashem od. They were evil. They sinned defiantly against God. Sodom, as we see what happened ultimately, they personified evil, and therefore Hashem brought upon them cosmic destruction. There's no trace of that society to that degree. So this evil man, the king of Sodom, comes out to Avram, who is the captive, and he has the audacity that he's dictating to Avram terms. Tein li hanefesh. Give me the people, and rechush hachloch, and you keep the possessions. Who do you think you are? You're dictating to the victor. If not for Avram, you would have been destroyed. You were the captives of the four mighty kings. You had lost the war. And now you're telling Avram, who had defeated the four mighty kings, Tein li hanefesh rechush hachloch. He could say, you're mine and all your possessions mine. Since when are you dictating? But nevertheless, the king of Sodom, because of who he was and his level of arrogance and evil and self-centeredness, he behaved as if he was dictating the terms, although Avram was the victor. And that's why he said to him, Tein li hanefesh rechush kach. And you take the spoils. What do you mean I take the spoils? The spoils are rightfully mine. And you're rightfully mine. V'yomei Avram el Melech Sodom. So Avram says to the king of Sodom, Hari Mosi Yodi el Hashem Kel Elyon. I lift up my hand to Hashem Kel Elyon. He is Kel Elyon. He's the powerful who supersedes and transcends everything. We'll discuss this in a moment with Keller Leon. Kodei Shemai Voretz, heaven and earth is rightfully his because he created it. Imichut vatzroch now, from a thread to a bootstrap. V'mekach v'kol shabach, I would not take anything of yours. V'lo somar, because I don't want you to say Ani Ashati es Avram, that you're the one that I made Avram wealthy. This is what he's saying to the king of Sodom. The reason I would not take as much as a thread or a bootstrap from you or anything of yours was I don't want you to say that my wealth is due to you. You contributed, or you're the cause of my wealth. That's what he says to the king of Sodom. I mean, how could he even say it? How could it even be said? Avram's the victor. Firstly, the king of Sodom is dictating, where he's the underling, and he's dictating to the master. So Avram Avinu understands who he's talking to. He's talking to a person who is evil on the most extreme level. And he understands, in terms of his perspective, regardless of who Avram is, he's the king of Sodom. He hasn't yet gotten out of his mind that you're no longer who you think you are, but he believes he is that. And he understands he's talking to Avram, who's a person who he could so-called take advantage of, because he's a tzaddik, he's pure, he's righteous. Therefore, he feels he takes advantage. In his mind, he believes he can take advantage of this man. Give me the subjects, give me the people, you can take the possessions. Avram understands, although everything is rightfully his, if Avram would retain the possessions, what is Sodom going to say to the world? That the basis, if I wouldn't have been wealthy, it's true, he's maybe the victor. If I wouldn't have been wealthy, if he would have conquered a poor people, he'd have no wealth. It's only due to my ingenuity and my success. That's why Avram has wealth today. Ani Ashati is Avram. It's not that he gave it. Avram, of course, is the victor. But if he was not victorious over the people who he was, and I did not possess what I had, would he be so wealthy? So therefore, I am the cause of his wealth, his renown. This is the way the king of Sodom processes it. Avram says, if that will be said, and it could be said, and it will be said, no one's going to say that you made me wealthy. My wealth, my success, my bracha comes from God, not from you. I will not in any way, to any degree, not even take a bootstrap, not a thread from you. I will not be in possession of anything that was yours. So let me explain to you something. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin, the Torah tells us that if you have an ir nidachas, if you have a city where the majority of the people in the city became idolaters, and the court, the Beis Din, the Sanhedrin verifies this through testimony. The Torah tells us the city has to be destroyed, all its possessions have to be burned, and the idolaters have to be killed by the sword. You gather all the spoils of the city together, you burn it, and nothing could ever be built on that location ever again. That's ir nidachas. Now the question is, why are the possessions in cities, why does it have to be burnt? It has to be destroyed. Because since that city represents something which the majority of the city went and did idolatry, everything that's associated with that city is tainted. It's spiritually tainted, therefore it has to be destroyed. It's like we find Avodah Zorah has to be destroyed. But here, it's not only the idolaters have to be killed, and the idolatry has to be destroyed, but the city being an idolatrous city, anything associated with that city has to be destroyed because it's tainted with sin, with idolatry. The Torah makes it a point when Avram left Ur Kasdim, who did he take with him? If you take a look at the beginning of the Parsha, he took Torah tells us Vayikach Avram. It's the beginning of the Parsha Pasuk Keri. Vayikach Avram Esarei Ishto. Ves Lod ben Ochiv. Lod his nephew. Ves Kol Rechusham Asher Rachoshu, and all the possessions that he had amassed. He had taken from Ur Kasdim. Ves Hanefshe Osu B'Choram. What does there have to tell us that he had taken his possessions? That his wife came, that Lot came, we understand. Hanefshe also b'choron, the people he converted to monotheism, also he took with him. They weren't considered his countrymen that he was supposed to disassociate with. But what does Torah tell us? He took all the rechush, asher rechoshu, all the possessions that he had amassed. Why? What do we have? Why does Torah have to tell us this? Because you may think, as we're saying now, regarding Iri Dachas, a city that's an idolatrous city, with God, because of what it represents, not only the people culpable and liable, and therefore they're put to death, but even the possessions of the people did not do idolatry. They were not idolaters. They leave the city, but they have to leave behind all the possessions. Everything is contaminated. Has that spiritual, it has to be destroyed. So you would think if Hashem is saying, leave this location, because what it represents, it's something which is evil, maybe he's not even permitted to take the possessions with him. No, so the Torah tells us no. Not only did he and Sarai and Lot leave that Ur Kasdim, Rechushim Sherachoshu, they took also all the possessions that they had amassed there. That's where the Torah goes out of its way, because you think it's similar to that. The king of Sodom, Avram is saying, it's not the Erni Dachas. But since you will say, Ani Ashati Avram, I made you wealthy, and my bracha is due to you, if that can even be considered or thought of, I will not take any possessions, although those possessions are rightfully mine. It's like the person Irani Dachas, who did not do idolatry, he did nothing wrong. But because his possessions are part of that city, he can't take it. The possessions are rightfully mine, legally they're mine. But because of your level of association with it, and you're going to say, only because you're going to say, that you made me wealthy, therefore I will not be associated with it. And that therefore not even a thread or a bootstrap will I take. Because I don't want, you should say anything that's associated with me has to do with you. You've given me something. You know, it's something, it's interesting. You know, you have two types of hosts. You have people who are very gracious hosts, and the host feels that he's the beneficiary, that the person accepted his invitation of hospitality. The other people, they host people, they don't give them much, but they tell the whole world, do you know how as a guest? I went out of my way, I bought him special wine. Normally, the wine costs $3 a bottle. This time I spent $10 a bottle. This is how generous this person is. What kind of magnanimous host he is. So what? You're inviting me, so you should be able to what? To tell the world how gracious you are and how giving you are. You know something? I don't want to be the object for you to ingratiate yourself and to speak about how great you are. I want nothing to do with you. Understanding if that's the purpose of me coming to you, Avram understood everything's rightfully his. The possessions, the people, but since that's actually what you're going to say, I will not take anything. There is no association between us. Not even the thread, not even the bootstrap. Now, the Gemara says a chulin, because he said not even the thread, therefore Klal Yisrael was zocher to the mitzvah of tzitzis. The tzitzis is a thread, because he would not be associated even with the thread. Therefore, we merited tzitzis. And that he said a bootstrap, which is leather, therefore we were zocher to Ritzu Shel Tefillin. Zocher, we merited the mitzvah of tefillin, because this is not even a bootstrap, which is leather. What is it all about? What does tzitzis represent? Urisemos uschartem. You see the tzitzis and you remember Kol Mitzvahs Hashem Elokechem. What is the tefillin, which is made of leather? We identified Kishem Hashem Nikor Lecha V'Yormi Beko. The name of Hashem is upon you, which the Gemara says is tefillin sharosh, and they will revere you. What are the tefillin? It represents, it's an oath. It's a sign of who we are. Avram Avinu, because he didn't want to any degree that his persona should be tainted or tarnished, that anything that he has any level of association with this evil man. Because of that, not even the thread. What does the thread represent? He doesn't want his thread ever to represent anything but Kedusha. Therefore, he merited the mitzvah tzitzis. Not even the bootstrap. The king of Sodom will say, you see that bootstrap he's wearing? I gave that to him. That's mine. I want no identification with you. I want to be totally removed, cleansed of any association from you. Therefore, that leather strap becomes the os. That's the os, the sign of who we are, that we represent HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That was the Midah Keneged Midah, because he saw it so clearly that he wanted to only have one perception of representation, that he is the subject of Hashem. He has no relevance to this whatsoever. Therefore, he merited both of those things. The thread was the tzitzis, and the bootstrap, we merited the tefillin. You know, it's very interesting. There's a Ramchal in the Das Tunos, he writes that the Jew has in his wardrobe a mitzvah, the mitzvah of tzitzis. Because if a Jew has a four-cornered garment, you must put tzitzis on its corners. The tzitzis represent the Torah mitzvos. So he says that you have a species. You have sheep, you have an ox, you have sheep, and you have goats. He says because these are the three species which qualify to be a korban, because of that species, there's an association with korban. As it says, the only korbanos, species which qualify as a korban, shor kesves, the whole species is elevated because that species is associated with what? With serving Hashem, with the consecration of the sacrifice. He says the same thing is true. The Jew, it's attire. But since within the attire of the Jew, his attire, he has tzitzis, which is mitzvah, that elevates the whole attire of the Jewish people is elevated because their attire is associated with mitzvah. This is the Ramchal. So with this, I was thinking, what's associated with our attire? Who are we? Our attire represents Torah mitzvahs. That's the tzitzis. Because Avram didn't want to be perceived as anything but. Whatever he is, it's only due to God's endowment, his wealth, his status, everything. Only him, not to be associated with any evil. Therefore, the attire of the Jew, everything is elevated because it's of its connection to the Torah mitzvahs. Even the ordinary attire, which is not the four-cornered garment, also has an elevated value because it represents the Torah mitzvahs. It's very interesting. The Gemara says in Shabbos, which we have, that Rabbi Yochanan says, the Gemara says that your speech of Shabbos should not be similar to the speech of the weekday. You talk. Your stride of the Shabbos is different than the stride of the weekday. During the week, we take large strides. Shabbos, we take smaller steps. During the week, we speak about weekly involvement, like business, financial things. Shabbos, we don't speak about that. During the week, we wear weekly attire. Shabbos, we wear Shabbos attire. The clothing a Jew wears on Shabbos is not the same attire that he wears during the weekday. So over there, Rabbi Yochanan says, what is one's clothing? One's clothing, he says, are machabdusai. Clothing honor the person. Attire gives a person, the natives that were uncivilized, how did they walk? They were naked. the nakedness was revealed. A civilized person, he covers his nakedness. So one's attire is mechabdusai, is what honors me. One's attire honors him. Now, why? On a simple level, what does that mean? We know that Adam, before he ate of the tree of knowledge, although he was in a naked state, he had no shame because he had no relevance. He wasn't tainted with sin. But after he had eaten of the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, he realized he was naked and he hid and he was ashamed. So what should being naked, what should that represent? Shame. As a result of that, he covers it. So therefore, one's attire is mechabdusai. That puts a person in an honorable state because his nakedness is covered. But with the Jew, it's more than just covering your nakedness. It's mechabdusai, as we're saying with the Ramchal, because the tzitzis have relevance to the Jew's attire. We're honored. What's the honor of the Jew? Because our attire represent attire mitzvahs. Because part of our attire is the four-cornered garment, which has the tzitzis, which we merited only because Avram says, I will not take a thread from you. That's how we merit the mitzvah of tzitzis.